theyeshiva.net.
So let's continue. Amid Nun Beis, page Nun Beis in the Maamar V'Yadaita, like 9 lines from the top. Line starts Gamkein, Gimel Chav Gamkein Oira Vaya Kanal. So the summation of the entire explanation till now is that V'Hine, Kamoishin is Boyer La'el B'Moshel D'Mashpiyo Mekabel. Shah Mekabel Yuchal Lovei Gamkein, La'omek Pnimiyis V'Atzmiyis Chachmas Harav. Everything we explained in the parable of the teacher, the mentor, and this pupil, the mashpia, the giver, and the makabel, the recipient, that the student, the pupil, can ultimately reach the full depth and core of the wisdom of the mentor. For as the Gemara says in Maseches Avodah Zarah, after 40 years, he can ultimately master and reach the das, the mindset of his Rebbe, which, as we explained earlier, the meaning of that is not he finally understands. Hopefully, he'll understand the Shia before 40 years. But it means that Koyim Inish, he can actually attain the ultimate das of his Rav, meaning the pure, pristine knowledge, undiluted, pre the Tzimtzum. So he says, K'moi kein, yuvan b'hanim shel gam kein. The same is true that we can understand. The same must be understood in the nimshal as well. The point that we're trying to illustrate, the be'emes, yachal kol echad ve'echad lovei. L'bchinas gilui pnimiyis v'atzmiyis ein sof d'shem havaya. That everyone can reach. What do we say by everyone? We mean every single person can reach the gilui pnimiyis v'atzmiyis ein sof d'shem havaya. The full light, the full revelation of the inner core of the essence of Ein Sof, of Shem Havaya, beyond Elikim, Sheyoyer Begili Benafsha. That it can illuminate his soul, his consciousness, his identity, his life, in a very conscious and real, authentic way. V'hainu, what this means is Aidei Avedase, through his work, B'Yegiya, hard work, toil. B'Yegias Nefesh or B'Yegias Basar, both the toil of the soul and the toil of the flesh, Lahasir ha'aleim v'estedim, to remove the layers of blockages and concealments. Harehu, he, the person, ba, reaches, arrives, l'bchinas gilui pnimiyis v'atzmos himself, to the revelation, to the manifestation, to the realization of the core of the Eir, the infinite light, Mashallah Maila, which is completely beyond B'chinas Chitzonius, the externality, Shenasa Makar La'olamus, which has become a source for the worlds. In order, as we said, for the Eir of Havaya to become a Makar, a source for all the Olamas, it must be filtered and screened through Shem Elikip. That has been the whole explanation, the whole process. That we call Chitzonius. Chitzonius means it's external. It's external because that's the only light that the world can absorb, that the world can receive. Just like the student can only receive the Chitzonius. Chitzonius from the word chutz, chitzoin, the outside, can only receive the most external layer of the chachma, of the wisdom of the Rav, in order that he should be able to absorb it and understand it and appreciate it and be enlightened and educated and sublimated by it. So it has to be in such a dosage that is completely custom-made to the student, and in the nimshal, to the world, to the creature, to the person, as explained at length. That's called chitzonius, which could become a makar for the islands. But since based on the premise that the only hester is really, from the student's perspective, because from the teacher's perspective, there's no hester at all, as explained. So this means that ultimately, from the student's perspective, there's also really no concealment. First of all, this is the only way you could transport it into his world. And second of all, you're ultimately giving him access to everything, because the mashal is really only a cover-up. But it's not a real blockage. It's not a absolute blockage, which means you have no access. On the contrary, it's giving you access to the ultimate information. How is it giving you access? Yes, by obscuring it, and by filtering it, and by screening it, and by mitigating it, and diluting it, and channeling it into these particular channels, which we call tzimtzumim, halemus, esterim, mishalim, all the good words for it. But ultimately, he wants to give access. And not only access to a little bit, which is also nice, it's better than nothing, but ultimately access to everything, to the full scope, to the full depth. And the reason is because, as we said before, if Lagabi the Mashpia, it was a hester, it would have been a hester for the Makabal. Since for the Mashpia, for the teacher, there's no concealment at all. That means ultimately for the student, there's also no concealment. It's just a process of what we call Ar Chayzer, in contrast to Ar Yashar, which in the Nimshal means that ultimately the objective is that, and the capabilities for every single Nivra, to be able to climb back through the ladder. And I use the word ladder intentionally, because the idea of the ladder is that there are steps, and each step brings you one rung lower, but each step that brings you a rung lower is also paradoxically a step that allows you to climb back the same way. So if there wouldn't be steps, if there would be quantum leaps, at some point there may be a quantum leap downward, but how do you get back up? You can't get back up, because the leap, the descent happens through steps, and each step is one lower step in the process. So each step could become a step in the opposite direction as well. And that's the critical point. Just like the Mashpia took the steps down, and for him, therefore, it wasn't a real descent, because each step below, each lower step, contains within it the realization of the higher step. It's just bringing it down. That means each step ultimately becomes also a step for ascent, not only a step for descent. The very same step through which the information was channeled and screened becomes the very same step through which the student can then unravel and use these steps to see, where did this step come from, and where did this step come from, until he goes back to the first step and that which is beyond the step. And that's the idea, that through the mashal he can go back to the nimshal after 40 years, that ultimately every nivra, every created being, even though it lives in the world of concealment, l'chayra, but really through Yegiya, through the work, just like the work of the student is a lot of work. As the Rabbi says, takes 40 years, what does the student do for 40 years? He can't be sitting and doing nothing for 40 years. When Rabbi said, after Arbayin Shnin, it means there is serious work and commitment and diligence. But the same is true also in the Nimshal, that the full Oirein Soif, so to speak, of Shem Havaya, pre-Shem Elikim, you would think is completely not available, even when you begin to talk about a world, and even the highest world, as we explained at length, this is the whole success and product of Tzimtzum. That's only on one level. But on a deeper level, when you understand the full picture, then from the mashal you can reach the nimshal. And in every step of concealment, there's also a step that brings you back towards revelation, because ultimately the hester, the concealment, is a mashal for a nimshal, and therefore it has all the truth of the Ein Sof, even though it's a process to journey backwards, and then every single one can experience the full Gilui, the full Ein Sof in his soul by, so to speak, climbing back that ladder from downward upward, just like it came down from upward downward. And therefore he concludes it's not only the chitzonius that you reach. The chitzonius is that which becomes a mucker for olamus, that would be the external information, but the full pneumius, the full intense core and essence of what he calls Oirein Sof, the Oir of the infinite. True, if he would start off with the full revelation of Pnimius V'atzmius, it would be like the teacher and the student. There wouldn't be a student left. There wouldn't be a world. It has to go through those steps. The ladder has to go down. And each rung brings it down more and more and more. Here it's not just like in a ladder where each rung is essentially like the one on top of it. It's just simply lower. Here when we say lower and higher, we don't mean in space. Lower and higher we mean in terms of consciousness, how much it feels itself versus how much it experiences infinity. So lower and higher is not in space. I'm just using the mashal of the ladder in the sense that there is a degradation, there's an evolution downward, devolution, I guess, in order for there to be able to be the journey back. Yes?
The mashal is teacher to student, and the teacher is connected to the Ein Sof and gives it over to the student. It's there.
Well, in the mashal, obviously the mashal is imperfect. In the mashal, the Rav represents the wisdom that is Ein Sof.
So
obviously, we're talking here about a teacher and a student that are worthy of this mashal. Yeah. I'm saying you have a teacher who, is teaching Gemara, and 5 minutes before he looks up the art scroll, and he teaches, so the teacher and the student may be the other way around. We're talking here.
So as far as really knowing that the Eibishter, I guess like we look at Moshe Rabbeinu as being the ultimate one who connected with the Ein Sof, then Tzaddikim over the Doros, the Tzanoim, the Sefrei Tzaddikim, they had such a connection or an understanding with the Ein Sof.
I guess so, yeah.
One question.
Yeah.
We've been working with the assumption that L'chaim Adar Mishnah is because, like you just said, that's 40 years of hard labor, diligent work at doing that unraveling. But there is another dimension, going back to the teacher and the Talmud. You teach a kid Gemara, and he has just no idea what's flying. But after a lot of years of teaching it, it's not just his continued labor, it's the breadth of experience. He's learning more Gemara, another Sugya. It all starts to fit together in a unified way just from the passage of time learning more. So it doesn't have to only mean Arba Mishnah in terms that's how long you have to work. That's the amount of life experience that you need.
Indeed.
In the mashal to appreciate.
Yes, for sure. 100%. 40 years includes all of that. Ein Chacham Kabbalah Nesayan, the experience of life, is the great teacher, the greatest teacher. I mean, there's certain things that people can't experience, even brilliant people, simply because they don't have the experience of it. There's something, for example, somebody who, there's a reason that the President of the United States has to be a certain age. It's not because till that age he may be unwise. Nothing is going to happen at that age to metamorphosize him into a brilliant statesman. But it's just something that comes with age, with experience, with seeing people, your own life unraveling. It's just a different world. Talk to a person before they got married, after they got married, before they had children, after they had children, when they had babies, and then they have to deal with teenagers. It's a whole, it's a different person. Sometimes it can really, weigh down on you on one level. But if you open yourself up to the nimshal, it can also...
So the more of the mashal you see, the life, the more the nimshal
100%, yes. Yeah.
You see it also by tzaddikim. You see that the Rabbi said something, no one understand what he said, right? 40 years later, you start to understand that's what he meant.
Okay, yeah.
Because at the time it's not really
that's included in it, right? Yeah. And sometimes even yourself, you'll read something, you'll learn something, you hear something. You look at it at a later point, right? And now you simply have the acumen, the experience, the knowledge, the depth, the maturity to be able to see it on a different level. The same Pasuk Chumash, the same Maamar Chazal, same Shir, the same idea, whatever it is. It's not that before you misunderstood it, you understood. But you just understood, a very restricted form of the art, because it's really all there. The question is simply how much a person can expand his kalim more and more and more, and ultimately go to the place of the nimshal beyond all the mashalim. And then you come back, and like the teacher, you could see on every level how it was just carrying and containing the higher one. It was not really obscured or concealed.
I have a different process. I don't understand something on the deep level.
Okay. Somebody once said about somebody else, he said, on the surface, he seems like a deep guy, but deep down, he's shallow. That's what one professor once said about a colleague of his. To the world, he seems very deep, but really we know deep down how shallow he is. Right? Here it's the other way around. Here is, when you go deep enough, you see that what seemed shallow really contained depth. But for this, you have to go deeper, and then you could see the shallowness from a different perspective, from the perspective of the teacher rather than the perspective of the student. Now here, we come to an important ramification, result, when it comes to avodah, when it comes to life in general. I'm going to try to explain something abstract and illustrate it in a more simple way, but this is not such a simple idea, it's a deep idea. One of the major consequences of this teaching, which is all belongs to the rubric, to the realm of the headline Simtzum Shaloi Kipshutai, and this is a continuation directly to the previous class, where we spoke about some of the ramifications, has to do, although I touched on it, but very briefly at the end, has to do with how we look at the finite versus the infinite. To put it in the words that we're learning, if you say that the tzimtzum is a real tzimtzum, then it would mean that the finite obscures the infinite, for real. In other words, the infinite, at some point, is not present in the finite, or I should say present in a very, very compromised form, in a very, very diluted form, and that's its whole function. That's the whole function of the concealment of the restriction. The innovative idea that this Maamar is conveying is that that's not the case. It may seem that that's the case in the initial process of discovery, but that's not the case. Since legabi the mashpia there's no hester, as he said before, haba hatalia, so legabi the makabel there's also no hester. In other words, what seems finite is really a channel of infinity. And not only because it channels it into a place that is incapable of receiving the infinite. That too, that's step one. In other words, what seems like concealment is really revelation. I want to bring it there. I don't want to hold it back. But in order to bring it there, if I wouldn't hold it back, I wouldn't bring it anywhere. I would bring it to myself. In order to bring it, I have to hold back. In order to give, I have to restrain. In order to express, in order to share, I have to be able to obscure. That's also very important. But it's much more than that. I want to give everything. And that's why the student put everything, la'olam yishna adam l'talmidoi b'derech tzara, as the Gemara Chazal say, means always teach your student in the way of brevity, means that in the kitzer, in the brevity, and in the mashal, you put in everything. But the brilliant sage knows how to put it in a way that it doesn't flood his brain, it doesn't overwhelm him. So there's a process to get back to the original, undiluted, unlimited information through analyzing and unraveling that which is in this information right now. As he gave the example of Mishnah, what the Gemara always does with the Mishnah, and what Mefarshim will do with the Gemara, and what Acharonim will do with Rishonim. You'll sometimes look at a Rambam in Mishnah Torah. The Rambam is very brief. He writes in his introduction that it's B'derech Tzara. He writes concise and brief. He wanted to have the whole world of halacha and Mishnah Torah. And the way the commentators, the Achronim, and even in our own generations, unravel the Rambam, right? He uses this word, and why this expression, and this expression, he could have written it this way, and he changes one word from the Gemara. They're not, and what you see is it's all there in the words. It could have been learned for 500 years in one way and be understood on some level. The same is true with Rashi and Chumash. The same is true with and every level. Even though Rashi Lagabi Chumash is already an arichas, that's the function of Rashi to explain. But yet, relative to another generation, it's still very concise because it's all there. It was all put in the Derech Tzara. What this means then is that the finite is not really finite. The finite is simply a lavush. A garment, a container for infinity, but not a container that really obscures it. And again, if for the mashpia it would have been a hester, for the makabel it's also a hester. Since for the mashpia we say there was no hester, because he sees in the garment the whole depth, so therefore ultimately the recipient has everything, even if it's going to take him or her time to unravel it. Those are the oisius. One of the ways out of infinite metaphors and manifestations has to do then with how we look at a fundamental question. And this has to do with the relationship between individual faculties and characteristics that you may call metzias or koiches pratim, the individual personality characteristics of the person, and his or her relationship with Hashem. I'm looking for the mashal. Talking about Mishalim. And this is a very deep, very, very deep idea, an important idea. Ein Sof, God is infinite. Infinity is infinitely above everybody the same way. If theoretically, if we could speak about an infinite amount of dollars, I know we can't because dollars are not infinite, but just purely in theoretical language, I don't mean this practically. That there's a difference between somebody who has in his bank account $100 and somebody who has $10,000, and somebody who has $100,000, $500,000, and somebody who has $8 million stashed away in a savings account. There's a big difference. There's also a difference between the person who has maybe $1 million or $10 million and the person who's worth $12 billion. There's also a difference. And there's a difference between the person who has 12 billion and the person who owns 60 or 50 billion dollars. There's a dramatic difference. And you'll ask them, you'll know what a difference there is. Because one can't sleep. One can't sleep every night until he reaches the next level on Forbes. So there's a difference. But that's all within finiteness, even though it's big numbers. If we could talk about somebody who theoretically has infinite money, then 1 and 10 and 100 and 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 and 20 billion and 60 billion are all equally remote from infinity. It's not like if I have another million, I'll get closer to infinity. I have another billion, I won't get closer. If you take away $1 million from $10 million, there's a noticeable difference. The person only has 9, not 10. And he will make sure to report it to the IRS. And if you take away from $100, $10, there's a difference. Which means even if you take away $1 from $1 million, there's a difference. It's not noticeable, it's not big, but it's ultimately made up of individual dollars. If something is made up of individual dollars, that means that if you take one and then another one and another one, you're ultimately making a dent in the pie. You're making a dent in the apple pie. Why are you making a dent in the apple pie? Because it's made up of particles. It's made up of pieces. Even if it's made up of 1,000,000 pieces, you take one, there's a difference. Again, I don't mean noticeable if you take $1, although usually people who are wealthier notice more when you take away $1. There's a word, al tiftechu b'nedivim, b'ven adam she'en lo yiseshua, yeah? Al tiftechu b'nedivim. Don't always put your confidence in nedivim and great benefactors. B'ven adam she'en lo, somebody who doesn't have tshuva, he'll help you. Ben adam she'en lo tshuva. But ultimately there's a difference. When you talk about infinity, so then 100, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, 1,000,000,000,000, nothing brings you closer. Just like nothing brings you closer, you take off, you take off, you take off, you're not making a dent in the pie because it's infinite. It's a different realm completely. Because it's a different realm completely, so you could say 1 and 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 are equally close to infinity and equally far. It's not like if I have another 1,000,000, I got closer. How did I get closer? I have another $1,000,000 in the world of finite, I got more. But in the world of infinity, it's equally remote. And therefore you could take and take and take and take and take, and you're not touching it, you're not affecting it. Why you're not affecting it? Because it's a chatchil in a different realm. What's the way that finite man can connect to infinite God? What's the way? What's the way that finite man, everything in human life is finite? My mind is finite, my brain is finite. My heart is finite, my body is finite. My capabilities are finite. My awareness is finite, limited. My potentials, my faculties, my talents, my resources. What we call identity. The identity we cherish. But that identity is a certain image. It's a certain box that boxes me in. As much as it liberates me, it also boxes me in. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. These are my hobbies. These are my instincts. If I were to go around this room and ask everybody to take 60 seconds and describe who you are, not what your nose looks like, and not how you like your coffee, although that's very important, especially early in the morning, but who you are in your innermost place. If you can just write down on a piece of paper who you are, right? How many people you think can do that easily? If you talk about Sunday football, people could speak 4 hours about it without hesitating. When you speak about a serious question, not that it's not serious, Sunday football may be very serious for certain individuals, maybe even life and death issue, Yeharik Val Yavar. But sometimes when it comes to innermost core issues, suddenly people become silent. And it's not because they have nothing to say, it's because they may have too much to say. It's too intense, it's overwhelming. But even somebody who expresses that, ultimately, as deep as it is, it's a picture of my self-image, of my self-concept. And even if I grow and I go, there are people who search and search. They'll go to every workshop and every seminar. They'll read every possible book. They'll listen to every possible class. They want more and more. They have this incessant search for information and enlightenment and truth, what you call a mavakesh, somebody who has this bikush. But after 90 years of searching, I can only access that which my brain can access, which my life can access, based on who I am, based on my IQ, based on my EQ, based on my chemistry, and based on another million, billion factors of my life of nature and nurture. How does then man, finite, connect to the infinite? Is there a point of connection? And the truth is, it would seem that to finite, you can go, again, 1 and 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 and 1,000,000,000,000, and you're not getting closer to infinity. It's like you'll say, because you can climb Mount Everest, therefore you're closer to Mars. Well, you're physically a little closer to Mars, but you're not getting on Mars from Mount Everest. It's a quantum leap. Yes, the fact that you could climb to the top of Mount Everest is extremely impressive, but that's all impressive within the domain, within the territory of our planet. You want to get to the moon, and certainly you want to get to Mars, and you want to get above that. It's a whole different realm. And having all the gear and being the most muscular, trained mountain climber, whose body is agile and completely in shape to be able to do that, it's impressive. And it's worthwhile for some of us, certainly, with the right precautions. But nonetheless, everybody understands that's all a limited level of growth that can take you to certain heights, but that's it. Now, once you want to go above that into a different realm, which was not infinite, but we call it outer space, which is pretty big. It's more infinite than our world if we want to make gradations in infinity. Now, the best body in the world and the best hiking gear in the world and the best climbers in the world, it really doesn't add up to anything. Now you need a spacecraft. And that's a completely different creature. In other words, you can't do it on your own. Because we live in this world of finite. So you're going to get to the moon. How are you going to get to the moon? You climb 30,000 feet or 20,000 miles. Gewaldig. That's all in the realm of earth. How then does man, finite, even the greatest spiritual or intellectual or climber, touch infinity? And therefore, there is an approach, and all these approaches, we say on them, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. They're not approaches to be dismissed. They're approaches that are authentic. There is an approach that essentially one has to say goodbye to the finite self in order to touch infinity. And the more one could say goodbye, the more one can access truth. And even though one can't access the full truth, but nonetheless, finiteness is ultimately a distraction, a disturbance. And from this comes two approaches in Avodas Hashem that have been taught, practiced, and are still taught to a degree, although it's not taken probably as seriously as it was in earlier times. That generally speaking, the more you could leave the world, and the more you could leave the self, the more hope you have to touch ultimate truth. This is what we call in Svarim Parshas. Parshas means asceticism, segregation. Why? Pashut. The whole world is based on one big fat lie. You want to live in a lie, live in a lie. Based on a tzimtzum. And the lower you get, the more tzimtzum and more tzimtzum and more tzimtzum. So therefore, are there compromises you have to make? Yes, as long as you're alive, you have to make compromises. Bal karcha chatachai, the Mishnah says. You're forced to be alive. But the person who cares for real spirituality must look for it above and beyond. Get to the top of the mountain and then try to go a little higher. Is it true that you won't be able to undo all the tzimtzumim? Of course not. But at least, ultimately, the real place happens when you go out of the realm of finiteness as much as possible with the tools that you have. If you can get onto that spaceship and stay far away from this planet, spiritually speaking. And that's why there has been an approach by many, many holy people. This people attribute it to Christianity, but that's not the case. It's people like to say that today, but that's not the case. It's been the case among many great and holy Jews. Anybody who's familiar with our svarim of machshava and ashkafa and musar over the generations, and in Chazal you'll find references to this as well, because there is a certain point of truth there, and that is that ultimately this world is the greatest cover-up, the greatest contradiction for genuine divine commitment, which is why you'll have comments and statements by teachers that seek segregation as much as possible. Why? Because it's very simple. The more you come into here, the more tzimtzumim you're dealing with, the more concealment you deal with. And the biggest one is the body, the guf. The guf is this physical creature who's completely insensitive often to spirituality. So yes, do you have to live? You have to live, but ultimately give it its due. But remember where real life is. Where's real life? Real life is the world of infinity. Let's say the world of Torah, the world of mitzvahs, the world of the Spirit, the world of God, and so forth. And the reason is because even the greatest physical life ultimately is all a product of post-Tzimtzum. But this translates in one more element, and that has to do with personality, characteristics. All of our this goes one step deeper. All of our characteristics are rooted in spheres. Spheres are God's characteristics. All spheres are based on Tzimtzum, Elokim. Without Elokim, could there be Chachma? No. Can there be chesed? No. Can there be gvura? No. Can there be category, definition, description? No. Even the world of Atzilus can't exist without tzimtzum, without Shem Elokim. Havaya Yudke Vavke, undefined, absolute infinite, completely pristine, no categories whatsoever. God is not wise and not kind and not empathetic, because the definition of wisdom is identity, it's a category. The Maharal has a famous critique on the Rambam in his Sefer Gvuras Hashem in his introduction, that according to the Rambam has a description about Hashem in a few places in Hilchos Yisodei Torah and Hilchos Tshuva and Moreh Nevuchim, that Hu Amadu, Hu Hayodeya, Hu Hayodua, famous expression of the Rambam. He is the knower, he is the knowledge, and he is the known. By people, there's three things. There is the knower, right? There is the instrument of knowledge, the brain, the mind, and there is the known, the information, the data that comes into, and there are three different things. There's Hu Amadu Hayodeya V'Hayodu. So the Maharal says, according to the Rambam, Chazal should have called him Haseichel Baruch Hu, the intellect, blessed be he. That's what the Maharal says. The Rambam should have called him Haseichel Baruch Hu, the intellect. He says that's ridiculous. HaKadosh, and Kadosh means above, beyond, aloof. And this is one of the great arguments that they have. And the Tanya, in chapter 2, the Baal HaTanya tries to reconcile the view of the Maharal and the view of the Rambam, the view of Kabbalah and the view of philosophy. But what I'm trying to bring out is all spheres, all characteristics are based on screening, obscuring, channeling the light into a limited channel. That's what it is. So now I ask you, let's say you use your mind and you use your heart and you reach the highest spiritual places with them. Ultimately, it's a world of character. It's a world of definition. It's a world of finiteness. What's then the path to God? The path to God is ultimately through suppressing or negating characteristics in order to be able to touch infinity, which is beyond characteristics. Because as long as a person remains within the realm of character, of identity, all characteristics, meaning all personality traits, all character traits, are ultimately a product of tzimtzum, even as they exist on the highest level. Where does one meet the divine, pure divine? In the negation of individuality, which is all a reflection of character, in the negation of individual traits. There's only one way, and that is a place where we all meet, where there's a generic service of God that is beyond the self. For example, you do what he wants. That's an example of relative, what we would call infinity. In other words, you surrender yourself to do what he wants.
Yeah, but you're going to have enjoyment. You're going to look at it with your character. You can't make yourself into jello.
That's true. And that's why, consciously or unconsciously, you will find a view that enjoyment is somewhat of a distraction. It's a little bit of a frivolous indulgence. So yes, in 2019, we have to tend to the sheep that are so thirsty for some inspiration. So we compromise standards. But in the real ideal of Avodas Hashem, you should not be present there. What do I mean you? Full emotional expression, full personality expression is really a distraction. Or to put it maybe even in simpler terms is, are the paths to God different? Or is it ultimately one path for everybody? It's just you're trying to be different. There's an approach that says ultimately at the Bar Mitzvah we give the same blessing to every boy. The question is how much you're ready to buy into it, how much you're ready to accept it. In the biography, ultimately, what really counts is the sublimation above self, the going out of your individual categories, and the more you can transcend that, the more you can touch truth. And therefore, ultimately, there's a generic there's really a generic system that everybody falls into. What's that generic system? That which is above your own. That's an approach.
Is that the ultimate gaining Chachma Bina Das or letting go of Chachma Bina Das?
This is based on the notion that ultimately the world of Gvul is based on Tzimtzum, and therefore it's frustrating. It's a frustrating place.
More Chachma Bina Das?
Yes, and you'll often see that again, it may not be conscious. These are the ways abstract ideas come down into Jewish life, but it will develop into a philosophy, for example, where all great people will share a very similar biography in youth. Ultimately, there's one way, and that way is there's one identity. There's no real space in the real world. There's no real space to align identity with infinity, because the two are mutually exclusive. So there are those who need to indulge identity, and we will indulge them like we indulge children. We give them ice cream. But ice cream is not, notwithstanding popular opinion, the path to infinity. It's a path to fat and some other things. It's not. Do we give ice cream? Of course we give ice cream, but it's ice cream. And at some point, they'll tell you, get rid of the ice cream and get rid of the potato chips.
So you just said something very important. You said the biography of so many great people is very similar at the beginning. Every eight-day-old baby is the same bris, same brachas we're saying. We don't know what the potential when you can say, God Leah. So in a sense, we're saying we have to trace backward. It's that period before we differentiated from the 8-day-old baby at the bris when we were all, generic. We have to really trace backward.
So so in Shirish, a lot of these debates and arguments throughout Jewish history. For example, can you serve God in the world or no? The world you got to do, you have to live, so you got to be in the world. But the real service of Hashem is out of the world. It's through spiritual matters, not through physical matters. What is it based on? Everybody believes God created the world, and everybody believes that God also said, well, not everybody believes that, but it's still a pasuk in Chumash.
If you do it L'Shem Shamayim, then it's...
Of course, L'Shem Shamayim. But that itself, is it something ultimately to be embarrassed of? Is it something that's like Nebach? You got to. So at least do it L'Shem Shamayim, so you won't end up in the worst place. But it's ultimately, it's the great compromise. And it's not just a question of, and the question is a general approach to one's body, general approach to one's physical self, general approach to the earth, general approach to the world, general approach to technology, to science, to physics, to every aspect of the world. How do you look at it? How do you really look at it? I'm not talking now about things that a person has to discipline himself in order to serve God. That's obvious. But I'm talking about a general hashkafic perspective on the entire reality of self, identity, the body. Should that even be discussed? Is that even a real discussion? Is that even a real conversation? Or again, I'm going to say it abstract, but try to understand the nekuda. If we connect to God and God is infinite, we can only connect in one way, and that's an identical fashion. The more I graduate my finiteness, it's where we meet the infinite, that's where we connect. In other words, the more surrender, the more submission of self, the more I could connect to truth, the more I could run away from self, which is all based on character and symptom and identity. Self-actualization, in many ways, is a crime against divine service. Self-actualization is the language of the ego. Self-actualization is the language of vanity. Self-actualization is the language of hedonism. It's the language of something getting close to narcissism.
This is all if we say Tzimtzum Kipshuto, because then there's a...
All this is if you say Tzimtzum Kipshuto. If you say Tzimtzum Kipshuto, then all of this is really true. It's a compromise, yes. It's a playground. It's a playground for children because they can't get the truth. So you put them in a sandbox with a couple of dolls, Right? Somebody once said, he said that his wife is very immature. What makes her immature? She said she came into the bathtub where he was and she sunk all of his boats. Okay? So yeah, we put you in a bathtub. You just got that. We put we put you in a bathtub and we give you a bunch of boats and play. We understand that. We understand that. This is your reality. Fine. God made a tzimtzum, yeah. But if you want to join the big leagues, if you want to join the Navy SEALs, if you don't want to sit in the sandboxes, you want to join the big leagues, huh? The big leagues are somewhere else. You have to draw a line in the sand between the kids and the adults. And this is an approach. And therefore, even when you're in the little leagues, a little guilt is necessary to be able to know that you're a child and there's something higher. And it will be expressed everywhere. It will be expressed in books and in speeches and in shiurim, in an approach. Basically, Olam Haza is a tragic place. Personality is a sandbox. At best, a cute game, an entertaining game. At worst, the greatest distraction to truth. Generally, even emotions. Emotions is the big problem. All emotions are based on certain ways of accessing reality. That's what an emotion is. Emotion, energy in motion, emotion. It's a way of accessing reality in a very individual fashion, which is ultimately based on the characteristics that God developed through tzimtzum. So the whole world of emotion is really a compromised world. And that's why every emotion begins with the word I feel. So you have two mistakes here. I and feel, two problems. I feel. One problem bigger than the other. For this whole I is based on a mistake, and this whole feel is based on a mistake. The I feel. Now there is a truth to all of this. It's all based on tzimtzum. There is a truth to this. But the idea of tzimtzum shaloi kipshutai results in the opposite approach. The opposite approach means that it's not really that finite blocks out infinity. The finite is a channel for infinity. You just have to be able to reveal it. The Hester is not a real Hester. That means that the full depth of infinity can be found here and now in the world, in the physical world, because ultimately even the lowest physical space is a mushal for Ein Sof. You may have to go many, many steps. There's nothing that's not redeemable, not within yourself and not within the world. Of course, there's a certain system of Shulchan Aruch. This you engage, this you stay away from. Each thing according to its patterns. That's not a question. And this is where the fear of the other perspective was, once you open up that sandbox, you're going to lose everything. It's all, there's, in a way, the idea of control, the idea of isolation, the idea of insulation. Even a question is the essence of Judaism based on isolation or impacting the world? We once spoke at length about Yosef and his brothers. It's ultimately based on this question. If tzimtzum is kipshutai, stay as far as possible. Why should you get into a place of darkness? If tzimtzum is shaloi kipshutai, then it's the other way around. Then the very world is begging. It's yearning for sublimation. It wants to place its mouth on the mouth of man and declare together, Yizgadal v'yizkada shmei Rabbah. Then the world itself is yearning for redemption. And there's nothing that can't be redeemed because the concealment is only the most external layer of reality. Really what it is, it's an expression of the Ein Sof. And that means when it comes to personality and character, not only don't you have to negate it, on the contrary, this is how your infinity is being expressed. Can it be a trap? Of course it could be a trap. Like the mashal can also be a trap where the student says, oh, that's a great mashal, and that's it. He stops there. He doesn't see it as a mashal, as a nimshal. Like Shir Hashirim. We spoke about Shir Hashirim. Shir Hashirim, can it be a trap? Of course. But Shlomo HaMelech kept it. He wrote it the way he wrote it to teach this lesson. We spoke about Shir Hashirim, right? Shir Hashirim showed that the world is a mashal for a nimshal. That is what Yiddishkeit teaches. To be able to see the nimshal in the mashal, to be able to see the infinite in the finite. It's a process. It takes work, but that means that the ultimate journey is not one of segregation. It's one of inclusion. It's not one of sublimation to go into the world of aloofness, but rather, it's the world in which you elevate everything, where everything can be elevated. Again, I have to emphasize this many times. When you say elevate everything, right, it doesn't mean I'm going to eat pork this evening for dinner because tzimtzum is shaloi k'pshutai. That's where it becomes kfira. That is why in Jewish history there were those who were very, very concerned about this language. Because, so now let me learn in the bathroom. Let me take the Gemara into the bathroom, right? Tzimtzum shaloi k'pshutai. And let me do everything. And there were those Jews who went beyond the pale of halacha using this language. There's sparks everywhere and God is everywhere. So one has to be very, very cautious and appreciate the emes of this. But the consequences are enormous in Jewish life, beyond what anybody imagines. In fact, most of the debates within Jewish life today can be traced back to the question of tzimtzum. And it boils down to one ultimate point. And that is, if the ultimate achdus, if the ultimate truth of Ein Sof can be experienced in the here and in the now, or not. That's a very big question. Ultimately, if the great unity, if the great alignment with truth can be experienced within the world and within the self, or no, it cannot. Alignment with infinity demands run, retreat, fly upward. Fly upward. And this has to do also very much with the question of where the self comes in, where identity comes in. If a person has a talent, some people are very talented, they're very creative, right? I'll sometimes really see this with Baalei Tshuva. People who make their way back to Judaism. And some of them are brilliantly creative people who have used their creativity in different ways. And very often they'll be encouraged, implicitly or not, directly or indirectly, not necessarily maliciously, but just by osmosis. If you want to be a real Yid, if you want to be a real Jew, some of you sitting in this room know very well what I'm talking about. If you want good shidduchim for your kids, this got to go. You just put on that hat, put on the right hat, and make sure you fit in. Now, it comes down sometimes in very petty ways, but in Shita and source, it's not so petty. What's this idea of everybody looking the same? Right? So people who are resentful and angry, social conformity, they want to destroy me. I understand that has happened to some people. But that's not the core of it. The core of looking the same is not trying to destroy people. Not everybody is a monster. People who have been hurt badly by systems, look at everything very negative, which I understand. But for that you need your own healing. Not everything is monstrous. The idea of looking the same means something very precious. And what is that? The more we look the same and the more we go out of our individual stuff, the more we can touch truth. You're not going to find God in the you. You're going to find God in the us. Or better, you're going to find God in the absence of I, in the transcendence of I. Now, I'm not telling you everybody can articulate this. I'm explaining to you philosophically how different streams of Judaism developed. And this is one of the most important distinctions. So it trickles down into thousands of examples. But all of them come back to one point, and that is run away from the tzimtzum. Run away from the gvul. There's no real place for it. We may indulge it, but deep down, when we wink to each other, we mock it. We may say, we're going to be nice because, it's part of doing chesed to get olam haba. Huh?
The absence of I is not equal to us.
You're right.
Because if nobody has an I, then it's no us.
Okay. You're right. I'm not specifying exactly how it works, but this is the approach. And you have to understand, it's very easy to dismiss it. It's not so easily dismissive. There's, like in everything, there's truths to it. And in certain times and manifestations, one will see the value in it and the validity in it. There's something safe about it in many ways. There's something safe about it. It's like if everybody just does the same thing, we know what we're dealing with. I don't have to deal with individuality mashagasim. Just... I once heard from a Yid. I mentioned him once. His name was Velvel Green. He's a professor. What did I say about him? Oh, about the evolution, yeah. So I heard from him in the early 60s. He came to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe the first time from Minnesota. So he met somebody over there outside of Shul. So somebody going into the Rebbe tonight. He said, "Yeah, you should put on a hat. You should put on a hat, Chassid." So where do I get a hat? So there was some old hat store. So a guy who learned to have a hat store. So he got this hat. It looked on him like you'll put on an upshernish boy a hat. These hats that come lower than your ears. I mean, it was good, but the main thing is he's wearing a hat because they told him. Out of respect, this is what you're doing. He walks in. So he told me, he says, the first thing, the Lubavitcher looks at him and says, "What's that ridiculous thing on your head? It's making me very uncomfortable." Take it off and then I can talk to you. He says, "Yeah, but this rabbi told me I meant." He says, "What? This rabbi said that you don't come in with your hat." He says, "Listen, if you don't tell him, I won't tell him." So you say, what do you mean? He himself was wearing a hat. Right? Yeah, you get the point. I'm just giving a simple illustration. So sometimes you'll say, yeah, well, you have to know where a person is. It's not only you have to know where a person is. In many ways, it's a much more messy world. Individuality is a messy world. Emotion, self, identity, who are you? Who cares who you are? Whoever you are, even after 100,000 years, it's not going to get you close to infinity. It's all climbing Mount Everest. She made it to the top of Mount Everest. I'll throw a party for you. That has to do something with the globe, with cosmos. That's all based on Tzimtzum Kipshut.
So those who hold Tzimtzum Shalom Kipshuto still heard Rabbi Akiva say, Lo Haya, they recognized there's a mashal, but they believe that the Rebbe did not give everything to the Talmud, that it wasn't all there for the Talmud to see.
So according to the shit of Tzimtzum, not Kipshuta, it means that the Ein Sof is not in the finite. The finite obscures the infinite. And therefore, ultimately, the world is a concession. It's b'di'evet, it's not lechatchila. It's a b'di'evet. But it's not the real way. It's not the lechatchila. There was a real break between the teacher and the student. And therefore, Parshas is really the place to go. As much as you could segregate, what would it express itself primarily? The Jew, right, who sits in the attic for 95 years and eats a minimum. Yeah? That's to be glorified. The more hunchback you are, and I mean spiritually speaking, the more I don't know the word hunch, bent over in the terms that the whole world is bent. You see the whole world is bent over. And again, there's a beauty to it too.
How does the existence of Torah defined by Tzimtzum Lo Kipshuta, the mitzvahs and ma'asim, an hour of mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim? If they're eternal, they're eternal. They're not limited, right? So how does that first approach to Tzimtzum define mitzvahs and Torah in this world?
Everybody holds Hashem gave Torah and mitzvahs to this world.
No, is it infinite or is it not infinite? It's my question. Is it if love Kipshuta?
No, so Torah and mitzvahs is infinite.
So that's an exception.
Yes. Torah and mitzvahs is God's
So it's
That's
a carve-out.
yes, yes.
So there is something.
And
in this
of
world
course,
that is
of
defined
course,
infinite.
of course.
Even to those that hold.
Yes.
It's a real thing.
Yes, yes, yes.
The Torah and the mitzvahs is really the ultimate way through both of these.
Yeah.
Connect to the
And sometimes you can have two Jews speaking about various developments of technology. Now, anyone with seichel knows that technology could be a great trap for addiction, for wasting time. Some people in this room know what that means, wasting time. And worse than wasting time, frying brains, killing brain cells, creating people who are intoxicated by some form of technology and they're not self-aware anymore. Well, you know that. But I'm not talking, that's obvious, because the same is with food. You can eat food and it's a mitzvah, and you can eat food and it's an addiction, and you need help. You could make kiddush on wine and do a mitzvah and connect to infinity, and you can make kiddush on wine and you're an alcoholic. It's an aveira, it's a sin. So we know this traps of human nature. You have to be careful. I'm going beyond that now. In the ultimate ideal world, two people could speak about technology. For one person, technology is ultimately a curse. Right? It's ultimately a curse. Even if I need it and I use it, etc. But it ultimately brought down the world. And for another, it's a mashal. It's a mashal means it's the Ein Sof being communicated. The same is true with every truth of the world. Every scientific development, if it's based on truth. Every appreciation in the world, every truth in the world of physics, the world of biology, in the world of cosmology. Again, I'm not talking about theories that are disproven in 20 years. I'm talking about the truths of God's world. It's all a mashal for Ein Sof. There's nothing you have to detach from. There's nothing in yourself you have to detach from. Here, personality and character are not just tolerable, they're rather part of the way in which you connect to the infinite. They have to be part of the way that you connect. Because this is the language of Ein Sof that is contained within the mashal. So the body now is not a detestable, despicable thing that we tolerate because if you get rid of your body, you won't be able to do good things, right? And there is that stage. You will see in Jewish literature conversations about the body that see the guf as basically this despicable rodent, right? This little creature, monstrous, self-centered, stingy guy who steals 9 hours for sleep and hours for eating and drinking and then all of his other cravings and addictions and taivas. Live with it. And there was a shit of those who believed in tinius and sigufim. What was sigufim? Sigufim meant, literally, they would mortify the body. Like a slave. Like you whip your slave, you are a slave. And I will whip you. And sometimes even torture you. And then not always was it based on abuse. For them, this was not abuse. This was a path to spiritual enlightenment. There were Chassidei Ashkenaz, the Gilgulei Sheleg, serious stuff they did with their bodies. And there are people who speak about this today with nostalgia. And they'll try to share it with the students in yeshiva. But they realize that Nebuch, the kids today are brats. They're American brats. So we have to compromise. And there is something glorious in that. Very important. You know, people are black, white, right, shit, or it's not right, wrong. There's a point to it. Because yes, you could become crazy about your body and worship it to the extent, right? Anybody who knows what goes on in Facebook and Hollywood, you worship your body and your mind dies in the process. Your soul dies in the process. Your relationships die in the process. Came the Baal Shem Tov, and he said there's a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim. It's a pshat in a pasuk. It's not a pshat in a pasuk. It's a worldview. The pasuk says, Kisire chamar seinacha. If you see the donkey of your enemy, roivetz tachas masoi, crouching under its burden. Your enemy's donkey is Nebuch. Somebody put a big burden. It's crouching. V'chadalta me'azoivloi. You don't want to help him. It's your enemy. So the Gemara in Psachim wants to know, how could somebody be your enemy if you're an Erlich Yid? So it says, you saw that he did Averis. Psachim Kuf Yud Gimel, there's a sugya. Mutter l'snoisa, mitzvah l'snoisa. V'chadalta, you won't help. Ozev tazevim, there's a mitzvah to help him, help unburden the donkey. So the Baal Shem Tov touched. Kisire chamor. Chamor doesn't only mean chamor, a donkey. Chamor comes from the word chaymer. When you look at your own chaymer, chaymer is your brute materialism, your chumrius, what we call in Yiddish grobkeit, your physical bruteness. And you'll see Sainacha. It's your enemy. It's an enemy of your soul. Roivitz tachas masai. God gave your goof a burden. The burden of Torah, tefillah, mitzvahs. It's not interested. The body says, ich will nicht. I want to sleep all day. I couldn't care less about you or truth. Roivitz tachas masai. The body sits down on the couch, literally, become a couch potato. That's where the expression comes from. Roivitz tachas masai. I'm not caring. You want to carry? V'chadalta me'azovlai. Says the Baal Shem Tov, you may think, well, how do you have to deal with this chamor? Abandon him. Neglect him. Tiny is segufim. You will fast so much. Shoivavim. Shoivavim is nothing. Shoivavim is a farshpais. I will teach you who's boss. What you do to a slave. What they used to do to slaves. I'm not going to talk now about the south of America and grapes of wrath. What they do to slaves when they didn't behave. You know what they did, yeah? They didn't invite them to a class. They didn't say, let's go to therapy and figure out a good way of relationships between you and me. That's not how they dealt with slaves. They beat them and whipped them until either the slave revolted and died, or if not, you were beaten into shape. Beat your body into shape. And this was a derech, fasting, mortifications of the body. They would do things, not kill the body, you're not allowed to, but for tshuva and for discipline, etc. And this was an approach by big Jews. It's not, the Baal Shem Tov wasn't talking about Christians. It was an approach by Christians too, celibacy, etc. Jews didn't hold from celibacy, but the idea of getting that body into shape, you're not going to be there for it. The Baal Shem Tov continues and he says, and I quote, this is a quote, Loi bezu haderech yishkoin oir haTorah. Through this path, the light of Torah will not dwell in you. Ozoiv tazoiv imoi. Levarer es haguf, lahalos es haguf, lezachich es haguf. In his words, help it, work with it. You have to speak to it. You have to listen to it. What's this all based on? It's not stam a vort. The Baal Shem Tov saw that in the 1800s or 1700s, if we continue to torture the body, we're going to lose Klal Yisrael. So therefore, let's introduce cholent and herring and kishkis and kugel. That has to do with the Baal Shem Tov, yeah? Like I am a mentor of kangaroos in New Zealand. Even though some people think that's what the Baal Shem Tov taught. Ozev tazevimai, let's bring in the kishke for Toyamel. Punkt verkehrt. He wasn't teaching a compromised Judaism for a new hedonistic generation who needs Kiddush Club. So let's drink a little schnapps and we'll get a little tipsy and we'll have everything. We'll have the cake and we'll eat it too. If you have some extra time, you'll learn a Blat Gemara. And when that was represented that way, I understand with the Vilna Gaon and other Litvish Gdolim, this is the new Judaism. Very nice. Schnapps. Yeah, some sponge cake. Today it's already more developed. But I don't know if in Ukraine they had more than a little schnapps. Certainly no jalapeno herring, and I don't know how spicy their cholent was. This is a complete misunderstanding of the whole idea. This wasn't based on a diluted form of Judaism. It was based on contrary. That before Mashiach comes, one ultimately has to understand the achdus, the unity. And the unity of Ein Sof is not a unity by Shamayim Imal. As he said, Im Esak Shamayim Shamata, Vatziyah Sha'olinek. That even the most physical manifestation of life, like the body, which seems at the surface to be dull and insensitive to the spirit, it has its own agenda. Now I want to eat, now I want to drink, now I want to sleep, now I want to do this craving, that craving, that craving. It's really a mashal. The whole Ein Sof is there. The student has not been blocked. The whole information is there. The whole infinity is there. In the body, in the world, in the self. Are there moments of pre-tzimtzum? Of course there's moments of pre-tzimtzum. In fact, in order for tzimtzum, in order not to get trapped in the world of tzimtzum, you have to have a connection with pre-tzimtzum. That's a separate shir.
Yom Kippur and Purim.
Yom Kippur and Purim, yeah. The vart of, I once said from the Yid HaKadosh, you know the vart about the Mishnah and Caleb, the days that are Makabal Tumah days, that vart. That Purim and Yom Kippur, yeah. Hafla de Kavart. Okay, but it's not for now, it's a whole shiur. But the point here is, yeah, and by the way, that's the reason, continuing last year, why? In the last generations, literally last years or last century, in the world of technology and science, we have received the telegram, the telegraph, the radio, television, the computer revolution, and the internet revolution. These are not mistakes of history. What do they represent as a mashal? What do they represent? They represent information being processed without delay. In other words, the teacher reaching the lowest level without delay. Radio, technology, computer, internet is all a mashal for a direct communication of Ein Sof. Time and space represents, it takes time to get here. There's physical time. Before the radio, I sent the letter. 6 months later, you got it in Israel. Today, if you didn't text me from Israel within 20 seconds, I already have a question on our relationship, right? You're not my friend. Why didn't you text me? 20 seconds passed, you didn't text me. And people get upset at you. Especially if you have the technology that you could see if the guy read your text. So he read, and he doesn't answer me. Chas v'shalom to think somebody is busy, God forbid. Who's busy today? Why don't you have your phone with you? He was in the bathroom. That's not an excuse. Beis HaKisei is not an excuse. It used to be a good excuse for your Rabbi in Cheder. It's not an excuse anymore. You take it with you. Baruch Hashem, the Shabbos. Yeah, but what's the real nekuda? Communication transcending time and space. What's time and space a mashal for? Time and space is a mashal for processes. This here and this there. I can't get from here to there. I need the stages. There's space in physical space. There's space spiritually. A lower space. What is the technology of instantaneous what we call information revolution? What does it represent? The information revolution represents a world in which infinity can trickle down the ladder without delay. In other words, it's direct communication from pre-tzimtzum because that's the only way in which you don't get stuck within the tzimtzum. But ultimately, what's the nekuda? The nekuda is what the Baal Shem Tov was trying to convey is that the self, the world, not just the spirituality of the world, the physicality of the world. It could be a trap. For sure it could be a trap. It's a tzimtzum. There's a concealment. You have to know that. When people forget that, and they turn the world into divine, then it becomes dangerous.
Still see some Talmidei Hashem, they exercise that approach of
Talmidei Hashem, very little. Talmidei Hashem, you won't find it. There's the Maggid once told his son, Rabbi Avraham HaMalach, he wrote him a letter, a kleine lechele in gif is a groise lechele in neshama. A little hole in your body is a big hole in your soul. What do you mean? Verkehrt? Perforate that body as much as possible. His approach was the opposite. Generally, Talmidei Hashem... Who? The Rebbe Zisha? Rebbe Zisha didn't have a penny. He didn't have food. There wasn't...
He practiced it on himself, but he didn't preach it.
Sometimes for a certain... You have to also have to understand the opposite approach. For some people, eating was painful. It was like a real distraction. For them, sigufim was to eat. You also have to understand that also. But as an approach in life, it wasn't about abandoning the body, or abandoning the world, or abandoning the self. On the contrary. In the real hashkafa, not because it's a compromise. Verkehrt. It's to be able to see the Ein Sof of Torah and mitzvahs in every nekuda of the world. Because tzimtzum is not kipshut.
I asked my question before about that life experience. This is exactly what we couldn't have had this year 3 years ago. We could have had this year on opening day.
Because
we need
the background
of everything we've learned. So now we're ready for this.
All the mashallah.
Now we're ready for this. There's a lot to unpack.
Doesn't say it's not the only way finiteness and infinity can connect us to Torah mitzvahs, right?
MS.
That goes to, that could be both, whether it's Simpson shooter or not. That's the only way a finite being can connect with infinity, no?
That's true. That's true.
I'm very slow to
Practical terms, right?
3 hours, 2 hours.
Good. That's fine. It's not a stira.
The only place to set Hashem is this one, right?
No, not only this one. He's asking, it says that Torah mitzvahs is the link to Hashem. Avada.
No, that's a different question.
Yeah, I got it.
No, he's saying, it says in Tanya, Perek Dalet, it says in Zohar, Leis machshavet tfisa beiklal, Kiyim, so in Zohar, in Tanya it says, Kiyim kasher tfisa mislabeshes b'Torah mitzvah. That's what you mean. You teufis Hashem through Torah mitzvahs. Because it's ain't safe. What am I going to grasp Hashem because I'm feeling excited today? I'm grasping my own emotion. This is emes. Because we live in the world of tzimtzum. This is emes. But through Torah and mitzvahs and avodah, one can ultimately be megala in the as he puts here, the pnimius and atzmos ein sof. But without Torah and mitzvahs, right, the person is just left with the tzimtzum.
That's what I'm saying. There's no way for you started this whole question, finding this with infinity. How did they have a relationship?
Oh.
According to I don't know whether Tanya or Mavieres,
No, so that's
you can touch infinity.
That's
The finite can have a relationship with infinity. It's through mitzvahs. It's through doing Hashem's actual physical
So
mitzvahs.
what's the difference? You can only do mitzvahs in this world. The next world is over, right? You cannot do mitzvahs there.
okay.
So what's the difference between Pshita and Pshita? According to both Shitas,
The difference of tzimtzum like pshutai, everybody holds we're here for a purpose, no question. Everybody holds you have to serve Hashem.
Right.
That's not a stira.
And no one holds that you have to eat because you love to eat, right?
No, nobody holds that.
So in practical terms, what's the difference? Not practical, but Lemase, what's the difference between the two pshat?
The Maisa is, if ultimately the hashkafa on the world is bittul or tikkun, azai or der azai, bittul or tikkun.
That's a good differentiation.
Everything's a balance.
Of course, you always need balance. When you have tikkun, you need bittul. You have bittul, you need tikkun. But ultimately, the question is: me will brechen de Welt, or me will aufheben de Welt? Me will brechen de Welt, or me will aufheben de Welt?
Considering the approach was aufheben the Welt, no?
So one of the Yesodis of Teres Baal Shem Tov was aufheben de Welt, or to lift it up, or to be megala the emes of the world.
So instead of not eating,
And again, it's in Yanim Dakim. It's not like everybody believes the world is Hashem's world. It's not we're not talking about brute. There's the approach of other religions where no period, whatever, the Galachim, etc.
Is it an end goal of getting somewhere?
In other words, within, when a person appreciates the true pnimius of the mashal, so as he says, they can experience the full gilui of Ein Sof here.
Everything according to the halacha.
But
Dit is verstandig, was sta je de eibeste, te beheren en alles is de eibeste.
Alles is verbunden mit dem Ebersten.
Ja, so, handelt de raar, dan het verstaat de raar.
Ja.
Nu wordt het verstaat de eibeste. De heer en alles is de eibeste.
we have to go in a closed room and be busy with Torah mitzvahs all day, elevating the world in the same thing, or is the purpose the end goal of creating something,
So that's a
changing
question.
something?
So one approach is that if you have to deal with the world, you have to deal with the world, but the Yevet. Another approach is that the world is waiting to be elevated. The world is waiting to be redeemed. It's not a person detaches from Torah and goes into the world, but the Yevet.
It means they have to find
It's
ways
this
of-
tension. It's a terrible tension. Avada, there could be a terrible tension. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah ultimately is to be mezachich the whole world. And that's not a tragedy. That's the whole kavanah. The neshama is sent down in order to reveal the Ein Sof in the world and in every nikud of life.
The Nevi'im had like a natural priesthood because there was not so much stuff around.
Yeah, listen, in each neshama there's people who are made to be segregated. But you also have to know your neshama. We talk about personality. There's some people that this is taka their shlichus. Like you have Yisachar and you have Zvulun, right? You had Koyanim and Leviim and you had Yisraelim.
People have to watch themselves, not to be balanced.
And even within each person there's balance.
Yeah.
It has to do with your shayrish neshama. It has to do with your circumstances. It has to do with the shlichus of your soul in the world. There's no question. There's always balance and there's always differences. Even if tzimtzum shalokim shutei, there are those that their inyan is ruchnius, not kashmos. Why? Based on so many different things. Based on their kishroinus, who they are, what their position is, their limitations, their talents, their uniqueness, their gifts, their position among the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.